So before we're going to jump on the charts and actually look at, applying the frameworks that we've been learning so far to real price action examples, we kind of just need to go over a little bit of more theory first. So in the previous lesson, the frameworks that you were learning, we were pretty much just thinking about that in terms of what we call swing structure. So looking at those big, obvious swings in the market. Okay. And again, another thing I keep wanting to remind you is that so far, all we are going to be thinking about is just one time frame alone. Okay. We will come on to multi-time frame analysis. That will be a little bit later on in the module. But for now, we need to completely understand and master all of these concepts on just one time frame first. Okay. So essentially, the way we view structure is by three main types, which, as you can probably see here, what we call swing, internal, and fractal. Okay. Now, over the course of the next few lessons, we're going to look at each of those individually, so you completely understand, what they are, how we define them, how we map them, and what they mean, and then how we put those all together, all three of them together, to give us our systematic framework in what we use to obviously trade and make trading decisions. Okay. So what we're about to go through is going to be a little bit complicated, probably for a lot of you, especially if you're new to trading or new to trading in this style. But that's okay. Do not be overwhelmed or, feel a little bit unmotivated if this feels like a little bit too much at this point as we go through it. It's kind of supposed to, but kind of as I was trying to plan these lessons and think what would be the best way to teach this, I think it does make sense for you guys to at least get some exposure of what it is we're trying to do with these three types of structure. Then we'll go and study them individually in depth. And then again, we'll bring them all back together at the end. And we'll go through this in a lot more detail. But I do just think it makes sense to kind of run through this initially, so your brain can start to think of, what it is we're actually trying to do here. So I'm going to go through it now. But if you start to feel a little bit overwhelmed and if you feel like there's too many variables to kind of, try and think of at once, trust me, do not worry, because we're going to study each of them individually. And really take our time with this, okay? So, if you have hopefully watched the first lesson at least 3 times, you should hopefully be very clear with how we look for a bullish market structure or bearish market structure, right? A series of higher highs and higher lows. You should be very comfortable with what strong and weak structure is, right? We want to buy from strong structure and target those weak highs, right? And yeah, that's pretty much kind of the main thing we need to think of for now. So, if you think about, right, I'm going to draw this with the orange line, these big swings in price action, right? Again, we'll get onto this in the future lessons, but those big significant swings in price action is what we are going to refer to as swing structure. So in this instance, this is that big swing pullback, right? We get that breaker structure. And then this whole orange leg I'm drawing, that is one piece of swing structure, okay? So at that point, this is the swing low. And then as we start to pull back, we know that this is our swing high, okay? So then I'm going to draw the swing structure again. This is all just one big swing pullback, okay? And then we go on to break the swing high to make a higher high. So that orange line I've drawn there, that's basically what we think about when we think about swing structure. And obviously, as you can see in this example, and as it will very often but not always happen in a live market, is we will get lots of structure in between that, right? In between the current active swing high and the current active swing low. Okay, so this again is the big swing structure, right? That big higher high, pull back to form that higher low, and that movement to go for the higher high. But that big piece of swing structure can sometimes be made up of little pieces of structure in between, and sometimes it can look messy and complex. And that's where the other two types of structure come within, internal and fractal, okay? And we're going to use those to help us make sense of it all, as you'll see, and as we go through, okay? They all have their own purpose, and they all have their own mechanical definition of the way that we map them and define them. And then also you'll see like how we use them to put it all together to give us signals and confirmation of what we expect to happen next, okay? Bit of a mouthful, bit of a long sentence, but let's slowly go through it and it will all hopefully start to make sense, okay? So step by step. We have a big bullish swing leg to the upside, okay? Price forms that higher high. Then we start to pull back, okay? So we know that in a bullish market, price will pull back, and we would expect that swing low to be strong and to hold. So price will pull back, but it won't breach it. Then we get the next swing movement to the upside, okay? Now, after a breaker structure, what do we expect? We expect a swing pullback, okay? So as price comes up, right, sometimes you can have a little bit of a pause and just a little bit of a pullback, right? And then price can continue to the upside. So these little kind of small movements, right, we don't want to classify that as swing structure because we want it to be a big, like obvious and significant pullback for us to deem it swing structure, right? This is just a little pause in the market and then price continues up. So I would view this, right, we view this as just one big push to the upside that can have small pullbacks in between it. So at this point, I would just call that an internal pullback, right? So you can see it, like you don't have to zoom right in. It's kind of an obvious movement, but it's not as big as like a big obvious swing price movement, okay? Then price can come up and then sometimes you'll get like a pause of like say one candle, maybe two candles, where it literally just kind of pauses and pulls back and then continues up, right? And that is what we will call fractal structure. So hopefully you're starting to see it really swing is like your big structure, right? So these big movements in price, okay? Your internal is where you get a pullback that you can kind of visually see, right? It looks like a pullback, it is a pullback, but it's just not quite as big as swing structure, right? Relative to the recent price action, it's not the same, okay? It's not as big, it's not as significant. It's just a little pause in price action, right? And then you move up, and then sometimes you get these super, super tiny movements where it's literally like one or two candles that pulls back, and then we continue up. And that's what we're gonna call fractal structure, okay? And what we have found is if you separate your market structure mapping, your framework, into these three separate pieces of structure, you just have such an amazing and deep understanding of price action that it really allows you to trade the market with such accuracy. Anyway, I don't want to kind of hype it up, but you'll see as we get into it, really just how powerful this is when you really understand it and nail it. But if I can kind of keep it super simple for what the three differences are, is swing is your big obvious swings in price action. Your internal is where you can see a pullback. It looks like a movement in price, but it's just not as big as the swings relative to the recent price action. And then the fractal price action, which we'll get onto in a bit, it's literally just like when you get one or two candles that pulls back. But don't worry, we have very mechanical ways of defining that, which we'll see in a bit. Okay, so for now, just whilst we go through it, just kind of think of it as like your big swing structure, kind of your medium internal, and then your super small fractal. Okay, so bullish market, swing higher high, we pull back to form that swing higher low. We get that break of structure, so we're expecting a swing pullback at any moment. Okay, so we get a bit of an internal pullback, but it's not a swing pullback, and we continue to the upside. We get a little bit of a pause, so just a bit of fractal structure, and we continue up. Okay. Now, when price first comes down and we break that fractal low to form a fractal lower low, this is what we call a CHOC, okay? So a CHOC, it's a bit of a fancy name, but it stands for change of character, okay? Character. So it just means kind of price is bullish, and it's that first little indication that price is starting to show weakness because it breaks a low, right, in this instance. But it's just a little fractal low. It's just what we call a CHOC, just a little change of character, okay? So when this happens and you get that tiny little bit of structure breaking, at this moment, right, all a CHOC signals is a internal pullback, okay? So into the internal structure is this movement here, right? So this is your internal low, that was your internal high, and then we formed an internal higher high. So if we get a change of character here, where we get that bearish CHOC, all that signals at that moment, or my expectation would be, because this is our strong internal low, right? This would be the internal range we're trading within at this moment. If we get a bearish CHOC, all I'm expecting at this moment is just an internal pullback, okay? So this internal low could hold, right? And we could continue up, and we could continue that overall swing leg, right? So a change of character is just where literally you have like one or two candles that pauses in price. It's like the tiniest movement, and then price may come down and break it. So at that moment, am I expecting we're going to get the swing pullback? Well, we have had a break of structure, so I'm aware that it can happen at any moment. But when we get the little change of character, that is, for me, it's not the confirmation that the swing pullback has started, okay? A change of character, so basically just a fractal, the fractal change of trend there of the fractal structure, when that happens, all my expectation at the moment is that we're just getting the internal pullback into this internal strong low, okay? That's all that gives confirmation for. So a CHOC, which is the fractal break of structure, right? That just signals an internal pullback, okay? It's only when we get the internal boss, so the I boss, right? Where the internal, that medium-sized structure, right, shifts bearish at that moment, that's when we have true confirmation that the swing structure is pulling back, okay? Appreciate, again, this is a lot to think about, but essentially we have the three types of structure: the big swing structure, sort of your medium internal structure, right? And your tiny fractal structure. A change of character is when the fractal structure shifts from bullish to bearish, right? Or bearish to bullish. It's basically a fractal trend change. When we get that, that's just the first signal that we're getting just an internal pullback, right? We don't know that this internal low is going to break because we expect it to be a strong low because it took out the strong internal high. Sorry, it took out the internal high, right? So that chock just signals the internal pullback. But in this instance, it goes on to break the internal lows. So we get a bearish IBOS, an internal break of structure. So at this moment, the internal structure is now bearish, okay? So once we get that IBOS, now we have the signal of the swing pullback, okay? So chock signals the start and end of the internal pullback, and the IBOS signals the start and end of the swing pullback, okay? So we get the chock, so we start the internal pullback, but it ends up breaking the internal higher lows, so we get an internal break of structure. So now at this moment, right, this is the internal range we're trading between, right? This orange line and this orange line here, because this is the internal low and this is the internal strong high, right? That's a strong internal high because it broke the internal low, okay? So now the internal trend is bearish, the internal structure. So the internal structure has shifted bearish. Why? What is the objective of the internal structure? Well, the objective of the internal structure is to facilitate the swing pullback, okay? So the internal structure has shifted bearish to give us our swing structure. So now essentially what we can do is we can look to trade this internal structure, right? Look to try and catch these internal lower highs and target what? Target the weak internal lows, right? And we can trade this, and what do we expect? We expect this internal trend to keep continuing, right? These strong internal highs to hold and continue to the downside, right? But whilst the internal trend is bearish, you have to remember the whole time that the swing trend is what? The swing trend is still bullish, right? Because this is the swing trend, and that's one big leg up, right? And the internal trend has just shifted bearish to facilitate what? That swing pullback, okay? So whilst this is bearish, and yes, we can look to trade this, you have to be aware that at any moment, what could happen? The swing higher low could start to form, right? Because this is a strong swing low, remember, we don't expect this swing low to break. So at any time, that swing higher low could form, right? And then we could go on to target that weak high. So when we get that next bearish internal break of structure, right, and we come down, we get a little fractal pullback, a tiny little fractal pullback, and then we push down. So that's one internal leg. We're now trading between this internal low, right, and this internal high. Now, as price comes up and gives us a bullish chock, a bullish change of character, what does that signal to us? What does that confirm? Remember, a chock just confirms at the start and end of like the internal pullback. So at this moment, when we get a chock, yes, the swing high low could be forming, right? And we could be getting that movement, but we don't have confirmation of that with just a chock. Because remember, a chock only signals the start and end of the internal pullback, okay? So yes, there is the potential the high low could be starting, but we only get confirmation of the start and end of a swing pullback if there is a what? A bullish IBOS. We need the internal structure to shift to signal that the start and end of the swing pullback is happening, okay? So when we get that chock here, all our expectation is at minimum, we're getting an internal pullback, right? And potentially this strong internal high is gonna hold, which is what ends up happening, okay? So when we come up here and then we get a bearish change of character, right? Which is the fractal structure shifting from bullish to bearish, we get a bearish chock. What does the chock signal? The chock signals the start and end of the internal pullback, right? So now that internal pullback has happened, we've come into the strong high, which is where we expect a new internal lower high to form. We get the bearish change of character, right? So the small fractal structure shifts bearish. Now the small fractal structure has realigned itself with the bearish internal structure. So now what do we expect? Now we expect price to take out the weak internal low because it's obviously failed to break the high. So the low is still weak. So now we can look for another internal leg to the downside, okay? Again, price comes down, the internal structure is bearish. Let me get rid of these lines. So now we are trading between this internal low and this internal high, right? So the expectation is potentially that this internal structure will keep staying bearish. But remember, what is the swing structure doing? Well, the swing structure is still bullish, right? This is the swing high and this is the swing low, and we're coming right into the strong low now. So yes, there's a possibility that it could break, but the expectation is that it won't. The expectation is that it's a strong swing high, swing low, right? So as we get that pullback and we're coming nearer into here, there's a higher probability now that the new swing high low is going to form and the internal structure may shift bullish, right? The nearer we get into this strong swing low, the higher the probability that the internal trend, right? This is orange structure here. the higher the probability that this is going to shift bullish because this swing low has to hold, right? And the idea is that the internal structure only shifted bearish to facilitate this swing pullback. So as we come into this strong low, let's go to these lines, and we get that bullish chalk, yes, potentially now, we can start to think that that swing high low is in place, but we don't get true confirmation that that is happening until we get that IBOS here, because we need the internal structure to realign itself bullish with the bullish swing structure. So when we get this chalk in here, we can get long and we can anticipate we're going to get that move. But at this moment, our expectation can only be that we're getting an internal pullback up into this high. But once we get that bullish IBOS, okay, now we have that true confirmation that this swing pullback has now finished, okay? Because the internal structure is now bullish. The internal structure has now realigned itself with the bullish swing structure. And now everything is aligned for us to target the weak swing high. So when that happens, now the expectation is that the internal structure will stay bullish until this high is taken out, okay? And that is super, super powerful. We're gonna keep going over this again and again through the future lessons, okay? But once you have the swing pullback and the swing trend is bullish, once you get that bullish IBOS, now the expectation is that internal trend, that bullish internal trend, we expect it will stay bullish until it takes out the weak swing high. Okay, and that's a very simple, mechanical, but powerful framework that helps us make trading decisions. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we expect this to happen. The internal the internal trend is going to keep staying bullish. Why? Well, this is now a strong internal low, because what did it do? It took out a strong high, right? So this becomes a strong low now. So when price is coming back down, what do we expect? Well, we expect this internal low to hold. We expect price won't break it. So we form an internal high, price breaks the high. So now we have a strong low here, right? So price falls back, it doesn't break it. We get another break of structure. Now we have another strong low, okay? And that's what all the bullish market means, is it the strong lows are the higher lows now, right? So again, let me kind of keep it a little bit more simple. Again, I appreciate this will be a lot to take in, a lot of variables. I know we haven't even gone on the live charts just yet. So do not worry if this is overwhelming. Do not worry if a lot of this is confusing. It's good to just get some exposure to this now. And then we're going to go down and literally break each of these three parts completely individually. We'll study them. You'll get to know them really well, and then we'll put them back together, okay? But I do think it will be valuable just to have an idea of what it is we are trying to do here, okay? So we have our big swing structure, right? We get a break of swing structure. So at the moment we get that break of swing structure, we have to start thinking in the back of our minds, okay, at some point that swing pullback is going to kick in, okay? So what signal do we need for the market to see to tell us that the swing pullback is starting? Well, for swing structure, we need to see an internal break of structure to signal, an internal trend change, right? That IBOS, that bearish IBOS, to signal the start of the swing pullback, okay? So here we get a bit of a pullback, but it's not swing structure, right? It's just internal structure because it's not that big. Again, we continue up, we get a tiny pause in price action, which is just a fractal bit of structure, right? So all of this is just one swing leg, right? That's one big impulsive swing movement up. Price then gives us a bearish chalk, so the fractal structure shifts from bullish to bearish. But remember, all a chalk signals is an internal pullback, right? So this is the internal structure here. So that chalk just signals an internal pullback. So at this point, where the orange line is, as price is coming down, my expectation will be that this internal high-low should hold from an internal structure perspective. It goes on to fail, and it's at this moment where we get the bearish IBOS. Now the internal structure has shifted bearish. So now the swing pullback is starting, okay? It's the IBOS, the bearish IBOS, that confirms the swing pullback, and it's the bearish chalk that confirms the internal pullback. Okay, so the chalk is the first little aggressive signal, but this does not tell us that price is going to have the swing pullback. It's only when we get this that we get the confirmation of the swing pullback, okay? And then we can look to trade this bearish internal structure to the downside, but we have to be aggressive with our targets, and we have to understand that it is against the swing trend, okay? So trading against the swing trend is never going to be as high a probability as trading with the swing trend, okay? So we have to, manage our expectations of how far we think price is going to pull back. Okay, so it continues to move down, right? The internal structure. Now, the nearer we get into that strong the strong swing low, right? The higher the probability that that next swing leg is going to start to the upside, right? So when we get that bullish chalk initially here, remember that does not signal or confirm to us that that swing high low is starting to form. We need a bullish IBOS, right? We need the internal high to break. The chalk, this bullish chalk, just signals to us that the internal pullback has started, okay? So as we come into the strong internal high and then we get a bearish chart and the fractal structure realigns back bearish with the internal structure, now that signals price is ready to target this low. The internal pullback is finished because we get the bearish chalk. Now we can target this low, okay? Get rid of some of these lines. All right, and then we come in, bullish chalk again. So yes, potentially we can start to think that that swing high low is in place. But remember, a chalk only signals the internal pullback is starting. Now in this case, we do get the bullish IBOS. So now the internal structure, so this structure here, I'll draw it on. This is the internal structure. All right. Now that's shifted bullish at this moment here. Now we have structural alignment because the internal structure has realigned itself with the swing structure, right? So now we have basically now we have the confirmation that we can expect price to want to take out this swing high because that signals the end of the swing pullback. The bullish IBOS signals the end of the swing pullback. So now what do we expect? Now we expect the internal trend to stay bullish, right? Until it takes out the swing high. So now buying these internal high lows becomes a lot higher probability, okay? So in this entire sequence, the highest probable area to buy, if this happens, it's not always going to perfectly happen like this, but the highest probable area, right, if we wanted to get long, would be to wait for this bullish IBOS here. Why? Well, that signals the end of the swing pullback, doesn't it? Okay, so now we have true structural alignment. The internal structure is aligned with the swing structure. And now when price comes back down, what do we have? We have a strong internal low to buy from. We understand this should be protected, that price shouldn't trade any lower than this line, the low. So as price comes into here, we can look for buys straight away. But what can help us is we can wait for a bullish chalk, right? Because obviously the internal structure is pulling back. So we can wait for what? We can wait for the fractal structure to then break bullish, right? Those little pieces of price action. When we get that bullish change of character, what does that signal? That signals the end of this internal pullback. So now as price comes back in, right, now we can buy this level here because we have everything aligned. The fractal structure has shifted bullish. It's now in line with the bullish internal structure, which is in line with the bullish swing structure. And this is when we have all of the stars aligned now to target at minimum this week high, so we can take profits here. But ultimately, we expect all of these bullish internal ranges to hold until we take out that high. Okay? And that's it. And you see how this comes back to always looking for where is the strong structure and where is the weak structure, and we want to be trading from the strong structure to the weak structure. Okay, but obviously there's different pieces of structure and you have to lay them together as we get into it, okay? But don't worry if it's something that's overwhelming, again, we will break this down, okay? But what I will say is these are in the order of importance. So swing structure is the strongest, it's the most important, it always will be the most powerful. Then your internal structure will be the next layer, right? And that's gonna overpower fractal, which is obviously gonna be the weakest, okay? So fractal, when that changes trend, when the fractal structure changes trend, when you get those little changes of character, those chalks, that just signals we're getting an internal pullback, okay? Once we get the internal structure changing trend, so we get an IBOS, that signals the swing pullback. So you see how it feeds itself in that direction, right? Fractal has to churn first, then the internal will turn, and then that will signal what the swing's doing, okay? But swing structure is king. So why is that important? Well, at this moment, when you have, yes, the internal trend bearish, yes, we can keep trading the short, but why did the internal trend shift bearish? It shifted bearish just to facilitate the swing pullback, right? It just did that. So as that swing pullback is pulled right down into that strong low, the probabilities of this continuing bearish, the internal trend, is now very, very low. And the probability of it shifting bullish, right, is becoming higher. So that's what we have to be aware of. And then once we do get it bullish, right, now it's high probability to keep buying to target the next swing higher high. Okay? So I'll leave that there. We're going to cover this again anyway in the later lessons, but I just think it would be super useful to kind of have this now. I would still recommend watching this a few times, but in the next lessons now, we're going to break these down individually, right? We're going to look at fractal on its own, we're going to look at swing on its own, and then we're going to look at internal on its own, and then we're going to slowly bring them together. And you'll really see how the pieces of the puzzle become super, super powerful in the live market. Okay, so please watch this as many times as you need, and eventually the penny will drop.